In the NBA, there's ebbs and flows, valleys and peaks, and there's always those occasional guys that we thought were going to be really, really good and just didn't end up panning out. Now, originally when I wrote this video, I was thinking about going with draft busts that have revived their career, but after looking at some of these guys, I realized they weren't necessarily a bust and more so ended up being late bloomers. In this video, we're going to talk about some late bloomers that revived their career this past basketball season, especially after seeing some guys who I even personally thought would never be in an NBA uniform again. The guys in this video have made a way into carving a true role for themselves with regard to the teams that they found themselves landing on after being, in some cases, a very high draft pick or a player with max potential that seemed to be able to become an instant impact player on any team that drafted him. A lot of these guys are guys that were probably traded by the team that drafted them because they didn't make the kind of impact that was needed. Some guys kind of like Zach Collins, who was traded to the Spurs and is now finding a place as a big and or backup center to Victor Wembanyama. We got some guys kind of like Lauri Markkanen, who he was picked very high and he was an impact player for the Bulls. However, he blossomed into superstardom these last few years. And we even got guys like Jalen Smith, who I would say has carved himself as one of the top premier backup bigs in the league behind Miles Turner in Indiana. Now, of course, the guys that I am going to be talking about have not completely reached stardom or even a guy that gets regular minutes, but rather a guy that has found a role on a team and can find his way into getting a 2-year, 3-year deal and maybe even having another team take a chance on him when it comes to a contention type of team. Again, like I said, these are players from last year, but we have seen their career pan out up until this point. Their careers have not been what we have expected. But this past season, it seems to be turning around a little bit and guys seem to be figuring it out. Like, comment, and subscribe if you're new. I'm back. Let's hop into the video. Now, the first guy that I have on the list is Dante Exum. Dante Exum has had an unconventional NBA journey for a player drafted as high as 5th in the 2014 NBA draft. His career sputtered almost immediately. After playing an impressive 82 games as a rookie, starting in half of them, his troubles began with a torn ACL that forced him to miss the entirety of his second season. He came back his third year showing slight improvement from his rookie campaign, but this was quickly undercut in his fourth year where he was injured once again, being restricted to just 14 games. His bad luck ended here because his next 2 stops with the Cavs and Rockets seeing more injury-riddled woes, which resulted in him being waived prior to the start of the 2021 NBA season by the Rockets. Exum's sentiments mirrored his career thus far, stating that his ACL was hard to overcome with regard to knowing he won't be the same game 1, but each time he found a rhythm, he'd go back down with an injury. After being waived by the Rockets in 2021, Exum found himself playing overseas for FC Barcelona, but even he said it was all in an effort to get back to the league. If he plays well, he deserves to make it back, and play well is what he did. But all the offers he got from teams with interest were not guaranteed, so he found himself in Serbia to play for Partizan in the ABA League, where he played in 94% of the games, averaging 12 points, 3 assists, 2.5 rebounds, while shooting 53% from the field and 42% from 3. At this point, this is where several teams called Dante Exum back, and he decided to go with a 2-year, $6.15 million deal with the Dallas Mavericks. The first year provided the security that he wanted, and the second year serving as a cushion should things not go as well as they planned in that first year. But so far, he's been the completely ideal role player and has completely revitalized what we thought was a dead career. In 55 games with the Mavericks this year, Dante averaged 8 points, 3 assists, 3 rebounds on 53, 49, and 77 shooting splits. Now, understandably, that of course doesn't sound all that great, but he really showed his worth over the stretch when Kyrie got hurt, pushing Exum into the starting lineup over a 12-game span where he averaged 14, 4, and 3, shooting 63% from the field and 57% from deep. He dropped 20 plus points 3 different times, including a 26-point effort against the Lakers in early December, which were the second most points he scored in the NBA to this point. And Exum has been like a TJ McConnell of sorts for the Mavs, providing a spark off the bench and maintaining a steady yet upbeat pace when it comes in the game, leaving the opposing team on its toes even when Kyrie and Luka were resting. Dante is only 28 years old and continuing to show a better bill of health and provide a positive role for the Mavericks. Keeping this up will see Exum quickly looking like a high-level role player and solidifying a true role in this NBA.
Let's go.
Short. Rebound. Washington. Exum. Pull-up pressuring. A three will tie it. A handoff to Luka. Back to Exum.
Got it.
This place is jumping.
The next player we have on the list is Dennis Smith Jr., one of my favorites, actually. I thought he was going to be an absolute star coming into the league. Unfortunately, that hasn't panned out, but this past season has shown brighter days ahead. Now, during the 2022 NBA season, Dennis Smith Jr. was a solid backup for the Hornets. However, they were one of the worst teams in the NBA, and thus seeing his name not being sought after by teams alike. That is, however, until Mikal Bridges vouched for him to join the Brooklyn Nets. And I'm gonna be honest, it's been a huge difference for DSJ and his confidence, and I love that for him. After starting his career very well, averaging 15 points per game his rookie year and finishing 5th in Rookie of the Year voting, he experienced a deep slide, brought on by a series of injuries, but also limited skills outside of defense and facilitations. He was sent to the Knicks in the 2019 Kristaps deal, then moved again less than 2 years later to the Pistons as part of the Derrick Rose trade, and he later signed with the Blazers, but only played in 37 games before being cut in late February. At this point, it was a real roller coaster ride for Dennis Smith Jr. to the point where he's even admitted that he thought about going to play in the NFL because that was something he knew he could do. He didn't want to play overseas because he felt he was too good of a player to be playing overseas in the first place, which I'll agree with him. I usually wouldn't like that bill of confidence because sometimes you just got to put your game out there and let people see it. But I think Dennis Smith Jr. is one of those guys that didn't need to be overseas. He probably would have averaged 50, let's be honest. Instead of him going overseas though, he got a training camp invite by the Brooklyn Nets. After all of that up and down, he eventually got a break though. He got invited to training camp with the Hornets, which is what then saw him with the Brooklyn Nets. This past season, he reinvented himself as a point of attack defender, showing real care on the defensive end, and he showed a leadership quality that I don't think a lot of people really paid attention to on that young Hornets team. He improved his three-point shooter since joining the Nets, getting his early number up to 30% from last year's 21% from deep in 56 games. Though his counting stat line hasn't been the most glamorous, he has shown a solid leadership role, and that's something that can keep you in this league for a very long time. Go look at Udonis Haslem.
Suggs turns it over. Smith with the quick hands makes it an 8-point game.
Now, I know the next guy on this list is probably going to get a lot of head scratches, face palms. I understand. But James Wisman had a pretty good damn year. Now, after a steep fall with the Warriors, who since coming to the league hasn't had any reasonable opportunities to rise, James Wisman at this point is likely to stay as a high-level bench player as his skill set needs to expand, including an improved touch from the perimeter. And despite the development still being in progress, he still has been able to show steady improvement after an injury-riddled first couple of years. After drifting in and out of rotation after arriving at the 2023 deadline, Wisman ended the year off very strong, scoring in double figures for 3 straight games in March. And defensively, he was making his presence known. Even late Pistons coach Monty Williams was explaining that he was a big guy for their defensive unit. There was nights where they beat Charlotte where he had 10 points and 9 rebounds, really ending on a high note in the game of the year, also scoring 21 points and 17 rebounds in 40 minutes of work. James Wisman showed he can be in this league, maybe not as a starter the way we thought we saw him early, but he can be a high-level backup big. Now, after the Marvin Bagley deal, it opened the way for Wisman to have the backup center job in Detroit behind Jalen Duren. Though this is still a disappointment with regard to his second overall selection in 2020, it is still much further than where his career appeared to be headed after the Warriors stint didn't really work out. It's funny, I just mentioned the guy that is next on this list, but before we get to that guy, I wanted to mention an honorable mention, and that was Jonathan Isaac. I thought about having him on this, but I realized he's only been injury riddled all this time. And Orlando Magic know that, which is why he hasn't been moved. He's very different from the guys on this list, which is the reason why I didn't put him on this list. If you look at the list, most of these guys were not kept by the team that drafted them and pretty much on their way out the league. Dante Exum was overseas. Marvin Bagley, I'm pretty sure, was with pretty much his last team before he was out of there. And Dennis Smith Jr., he probably wasn't going to take playing overseas. Jonathan Isaac, however, he was. And that's because the Orlando Magic understood what they had in this player. It was just freakish injuries that were getting in the way. So shout out to you, Jonathan Isaac. I hope you continue to stay and have a clean bill of health, because as a defender on that Orlando Magic team, you are rock solid. And I'm not going to put that in the air yet. Maybe another good defensive year and I could talk about those other talks. But for now, we're going to get to the last player on the list, and that's Marvin Bagley. Despite losing the backup job in Detroit to James Wisman, this didn't mean Bag wasn't ready for NBA minutes, because after being traded to Washington, a fresh Marvin Bagley saw more minutes, which were scarce with his former team, the Pistons. In his first 2 games with his new team, Bag became just the 3rd NBA player ever to record consecutive games scoring 20 points and grabbing 10 rebounds with a new team after an in-season trade. The other 2 to accomplish this were Wilt Chamberlain and 3-time All-Star Antoine Walker. Bagley showed his potential with a hard hat attitude every time he was on the floor with the Wizards. There were a few games that I did watch. Obviously, I'm not watching Wizards basketball like crazy, but despite being inactive those last 6 games, in the final 6 games he played during this season, he averaged 12.5 points, shooting 66% from the field with 7 boards to go with it. And what was a low-risk move for the Wizards, they got a 25-year-old Bag who can score in bunches in the paint, collect defensive boards at an above-average rate early in his career. And honestly, one of the few questions I have personally is about the Wizards development system, how well they can continue to support Bag and his growth as a glass cleaner next to Corey Kispert, Deni Adivija, and Bilal Coulibaly. Now, speaking of those 3, that tells me the Wizards development system is in good hands. Now, with Gafford being moved to the Mavs this past year, this opens the door for Marvin Bagley to become a starter and potentially having the room to develop on a rebuilding team, ironically enough. Funny enough, I wanted to do this video a little bit earlier before the season ended, actually, but you know, life got in the way. We're back now, don't worry about that. But I say that to say, who are some of the guys that you think will be guys that save their career this coming season? Some guys that probably have been stinkers and they've been very, very disappointing up until this point, but you still have faith in them. You know, some of those Ben Simmons guys who, hey, if you still holding on to faith to Ben Simmons, more power to you, but just some guys like that, I guess. But that's all I got for you guys in this video. Of course, as always, if you're new, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're not new, welcome back to the channel. I promise you, I am back. I promise you. I know I've said it before. I know I've said it before. I'm back this time. I promise. It's your boy TV with the greatest hoop stories and debates on the tube, and I'm out. Peace.